Halito, Sahochifoyet Catherine Witzig. Hello, my name is Catherine Witzig. I'm a member of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. My pronouns are she, they, and I serve as the chair of the Tribal Libraries Committee for the Oklahoma Library Association.
Carl?
Good morning. My name is Carl Seward. My pronouns are they, them. I am the Emerging and Immersive Technology Librarian at UCO. I'm in charge of the makerspace here, but I have 20 years in libraries, including almost 12 years at Tulsa City County Library at the Hardesty Regional Library. And I'm very glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Larissa?
Hello, my name is Larissa McNeil. I am the African American Resource Center Coordinator for the Tulsa City County Library, educator by trade, and excited to be here today.
Thank you so much. And Kim?
Hi, my name is Kim Zahler. My pronouns are she, her. And I've worked for the Norman Public Library in Norman, Oklahoma in the children's section for 27 years.
Awesome. And Amarani?
Hi, everybody. My pronouns are she and they. I am the Hispanic Resource Center coordinator. I work alongside Larissa at the Tulsa City County Library. And yeah, we have a center there. We are located in East Tulsa, and our collection is all Spanish materials, as well as programming throughout the year. And I am also a poet and a multidisciplinary artist.
Great. Thank you all so much for being here and for being a part of this and letting us pick your brain and how we can be better librarians for our whole community. So I want to get started with just asking some of our panelists specific questions. And the first question I have is for Kim. So how do you think libraries can create intentional book displays? How can libraries create intentional book displays that authentically represent and celebrate the diversity of all cultures throughout the year?
Well, I'm very lucky in that I have really great selectors and catalogers. So that makes my job a lot easier, in that my selectors buy a lot of diverse books. So they're in my collection, and my catalogers make certain that it's easy for me to find. I go through whenever we get new books in. That's the easiest way I have found, is that when new books come in, I look at them. I read a lot of the books. I think knowing your collection is really, really important. If you don't have time to read, you can listen to them. I will listen to an audiobook in the 5 minutes it would take me to go to work. 5 minutes there, 5 minutes back. I've 20 minutes. I've read that. I've now have under my belt. And so I listen to the books a lot. Obviously, we can't read all the books, so I mine Novelist a lot to see what Library School Journal says, or Kirkus. A lot of times that will flag some books for me that might have some stereotypes that I wouldn't want to put on a display. They're going to slip through. Then we have the display space too. So in general, I have just been doing it during the months, but I've become more aware just lately. I'll admit that's not something we should just, we shouldn't just have Latinx during September and October. So I'm just now learning that, I will say. But in my whole collection, I also have room at the end of my books. So I constantly have usually books that I've read that are facing out, that feature all kinds of characters.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We have Carl and a lot of other people that can speak on that. Does anybody else kind of want to lean into that question as well? Oh, go ahead, Kim.
Oh,
Sorry.
the other thing is that because I'm not an expert on everything, I also will, like, there are books that I have coworkers that I have read some of the books that I think that they will have a better perspective on than me, just because of their background. Just because I mean, I can only bring my own perspectives. So I just want to say, I'll use your friends and family and coworkers as well, to help you find books that are great to display. So that's it.
That's awesome, Kim. Thank you so much. Does anybody else like to speak to kind of what Kim was talking about or have their own thoughts on that question? I can read it again if you'd like.
I just want to say I really like the idea of like leaning on other people and their experiences, because I think so much it feels like it sometimes feels like a one-man job to try and, create these displays and do all the work. But, that's absolutely how it should be. It should be community based. It should be a network based kind of thing. So I just want to say I really liked that part of your response.
All right, awesome. Thank you guys so much. All right, the next question I have is for Carl. They are a little more focused on the querying your displays. That's something that we are excited that you're including. And so what strategies can librarians implement to make library spaces more inclusive and welcoming for LGBTQ communities through display curation?
So I will post a link in a moment to an article, but one of my favorite works on the subject of collection development is an article that talks about collections as mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. I'm sure that many of you are familiar with that. And I think that a display should be a microcosm of your collection. So when you're building a display, whatever the theme of that display is, you want to include things on it that reflect the people that you see coming into your library, but also the people that you don't see. And theme displays can be almost anything. I remember when I was at Hardesty Library, I happened to be shelving books one day, and I shelved 3 different books where the title began with the city of. And I thought, well, that'd make an interesting display. So we'll make a display of books that start with the city of. Or one year during December, I did a red-green display where the books just had red and green covers, you know. And so choosing your theme as something that's engaging and exciting, but then going through your collection and finding things on your shelves that fit that theme, but that also expose other types of experiences and let people have ways of seeing outside of their personal experience, or that allow them to see themselves in your display. And I also always encourage not to forget nonfiction. Too often we make our displays all fiction, and I think that is a little bit of personal bias from librarians who tend to be fiction readers, but particularly reluctant readers tend to gravitate toward nonfiction if they do. So including nonfiction in your displays is also a really good thing.
That is an amazing point to have, and I'm definitely being called out because I do that. And I was just going to give anybody else a chance, that if they've had experience at their library, or if they'd like to see something on the panel that would help queer users and community members see, if you have any experience in that, just to speak up.
I just wanted to say that I agree with that, I mean, things have crossover. You don't have to keep queer characters only to that display. There are lots of great fantasies that have queer characters, or they're great African-American books that have queer characters, or there's a lot of crossover. And so I don't feel like putting those in a box and separating them out. I love that you can make those cross over and be displaying those characters all year round.
Yeah, striving to make your displays as intersectional as possible.
That's a great point. And I really love the city of. I'm stealing that. All right. So next question is for Larissa. As the coordinator of the African American Resource Center, how do you approach the selection of materials to ensure a comprehensive representation of African American culture and experiences?
Great question. Okay, so every year or every couple of years, we're asked to sit down and write a collection development plan. And I really like that plan because it allows us to actually sit down, see what we have in our collection, and make an intentional plan for the next year or the next couple of years. And so when I'm doing that, the things that I'm looking through journals and all that kind of stuff too, but I think my focus is really on being aware of the trials and the triumphs of my community at large. And then I'm also thinking about paying attention to the different classifications, right? So religion, philosophy, literature, poetry, sports, politics, history, et cetera, et cetera. And then thinking about what are the intersectionalities of my culture that I can think about in each of those sections. So am I making sure that there are representation of women in sports, right? Or um, women in politics? Am I making sure that people who are disabled or neurodivergent are being represented in arts? Am I making sure that the voices of people who are poor, people who are queer to LGBTQIA plus, people who lived in the North during the Jim Crow era, am I making sure that like I am thinking of the intersections of my culture in each of these sections? Am I pulling those underrepresented voices everywhere I look and not just having the same voices being heard as tends to be, because everybody knows Martin Luther King, everybody knows Malcolm X, right? So we want to make sure that we are pulling voices from all of the groups, because Black people are everywhere, right? And so making sure that I'm having that represented in every different section of my collection. And so just like making sure that I'm having that representation across all of my sectors. So that's how I approach it.
Thank you so much. Real quick, Sarah has joined us. Thank you so much, Sarah, for joining us. We got started a little bit, but if you don't mind, just doing a quick intro. We have your bio in the chat, so if anyone would like to look more detailed, it is there. I'm Cheyenne. I'm your moderator today. So thank you so much for being here.
Oh, al contrario, thank you for the invitation. It's always wonderful to participate in panel. Hola, Carl, so good to see you. Catherine's here. I'm Mairani. Thank you for sending me the link. I manage the Nathan Hale branch for Tulsa City County Library. Currently, I'm also chairing the Corazon chapter for Reforma, the National Association for Latino Librarians, basically. And I'm also serving as co-chair on the We Need Diverse Books Committee. We're actually deliberating tonight. I'm choosing our teen honoree. So it's a thrill to be here with you all. Thank you. Thank you for being patient with me getting my technology straight.
All good. Thank you so much, Sarah, for being here. All right, if it's okay, I'll get back started with questions. Sarah, I won't bombard you as soon as you get on. I will pass it on to Amarani. All right, as a multidisciplinary artist, do you integrate your artistic background into programming and collection management at the Hispanic Resource Center? And how do you do so, if you do?
Yes, I love this question because that's kind of what I've been prioritizing. I'm using my skill set as a way to bring in programming that maybe hasn't been offered or that I don't see very often in our community. When I first started, I noticed that a lot of our programming was based on like celebration, and celebration is good, but specifically for like the Latinx community, we have very diverse philosophies, and our language is so, is so expansive, so many different just traditions and practices. And specifically, I dove into um, like Hispanic, Latinx, and Indigenous art practices because I myself was very interested and I had some experience through some of my work as well. And I've been doing a lot of art workshops where we're just kind of exploring different mediums. Sometimes we'll do ceramics. We just did a paper mache, papel mache activity that was really fun. And a lot of our customers that are coming in, this is maybe the first time that, they're ever doing this. And um, one of the things I've really noticed is for me personally as an artist, when I was growing up, uh, art wasn't seen as like a conventional career. And so it kind of went along with like, being an author and being a writer. And I was very interested by that. And so I'm seeing a lot of youth that are coming in and them being able to have that connection with, say, a parent, and they're coming into the library. Um, and they also get to learn a little bit about the practice. So, they might come in and visit the center afterwards and pick up some of our books. So yeah, just like trying to hit on all of the important aspects of our community and exposing people to um, different practices from all over Latin America because we're all over the place as well. So yeah, that's one of the ways that I've been trying to incorporate.
That's awesome. Do you, we talked a little bit about how, it says that you're a collection management for the System Spanish collection. Has that also impacted the ways that you serve your Spanish speakers or Spanish readers in that collection management and maintenance? Do you think that that is also kind of bled into that, or will you share that?
Yeah, I would say specifically it's a good opportunity, I think, to hear in what the community is wanting or what they like, especially because it's bringing in such diverse crowds. Um, so specifically for like nonfiction, I think somebody said we can't forget nonfiction. It's opened up a lot of you know, different titles that you wouldn't normally think about. When you think about, we see a lot of crocheting books and a lot of cooking, but now we can go into a little more of like maybe like a book on ceramics or pottery or ancient traditional practices from some of like our first empires going into like Aztec and Mayan. And so that for me, I've learned so much. So it's nice to be able to kind of expand what people have the opportunity to check out in the system.
That's really exciting. And I think that's such a big part of what we're talking about today. So I'm excited to hear what everyone else has to say about how they do that in theirs. All right. So I'm going to ask Catherine, next question. In what ways can libraries ensure accurate and respectful representation of Indigenous cultures in their displays and in their collections?
So when I was hearing this question, I think the first thing that I thought about is listening. I think that's what it really comes down to is listening to the individuals in these communities. And this can really be done in a lot of different ways. So kind of like Kim was describing, just, lean on your Indigenous staff. They have those experiences and they have those connections. So just kind of like see what insights they have. Listen to the recommendations, open up a line of communication with those individuals. And if you don't have or can't locate Indigenous staff, that's really something to think about. Like, why don't you have Indigenous staff at your library? Especially here in Oklahoma, since we have so many different tribal nations, why aren't there Indigenous individuals serving in your libraries? And think about what you can do to help fix that. because they should be in your libraries, either as staff or as people being served. When you're doing research on your material selection, prioritize finding material from Native American authors and contributors rather than specifically materials about Native Americans. This makes a huge impact, and you may have similar information, but you want to hear it from the source. And these people are the source. I would say something to keep in mind is that there are many, many different tribal nations, each with their own unique history and customs. So it's something to be really mindful of generalizations and stereotypes. So kind of like Amairani was describing, like the culture is expansive, the languages are expansive. And so having just one idea of what it looks like to be Native American is just not correct. And it's really disingenuous, especially when you're using that in the context of creating your collections. Another recommendation I have is if you're living on the lands of or a place that has a dense population from a single tribal nation, consider incorporating their language into your signage or into any sort of displays or marketing materials. And this gives a really good opportunity for you to connect with those tribal nations because they will have elders or language specialists who you can bring in to get the most accurate information. And then people who are just now learning their language again, they get to see it out in the open and they get to feel reaffirmed that their language is not dead. It's being revitalized in all of these really public places. And my last one is I would absolutely utilize the work of Native reviewers. One really specific example I have is Dr. Debbie Reese, who is Nambe Pueblo. And she creates the American Indians in Children's Literature website. She'll often have a year in review where she'll talk about a lot of the books that have come out about Native American populations, especially from Native American individuals, and give a review of how those can work in your collections. So again, it really just comes down to listening to the communities that you're trying to represent.
That's a great resource and just a great overall, I think, subject or thing to have is listening for this. Catherine, do you mind sharing that did you say it was an author or is she just a reviewer specifically?
She is a librarian, and I will drop that link in the chat.
Thank you so much. That's awesome. All right. My next question is for Sarah. How can libraries promote diverse reading experiences across various genres to appeal to a broader audience?
Oh, how indeed. Okay. So I think I must have rotated off the list here at some point, but so my specialty is readers advisory, and I think what I've done over my career is really look at ways to help communities broaden their reading experience and make sure that you're always kind of asking people to push, just dip their toe in something different, try it out, don't be afraid. And then also channel our hero Nancy Pearl. If you start a book and it's not grabbing you after 50 pages, it's okay to move on to the next book. Okay, don't feel guilty. What I've been doing is reading, and then I'll just skip ahead to the last chapter. Okay, what finally happens to these people? That's all I want to know. But another thing, basically, whenever I work on any kind of readers advisory, for example, we have a Your Next Great Reads program where people send in their surveys and they answer what they're interested in reading. I've advocated to make it a priority that everybody that does a survey includes some kind of diversity in their surveys, in their responses. At least one author of color, at least one non-traditional book, something so that we just fold that in as a habit, make it a custom. That's when we do readers advisory, we're consciously, mindfully looking for something a little outside of the box, include a debut author, include a science fiction writer of color. There's so much that's happening now in all, in science fiction and all genres with new writers. And that's one of the things we're seeing in the We Need Diverse Books committee I've been working on, is that when they started, they really had to search for young reader and new teen works featuring diverse communities and protagonists. And now we had to read over 400 books that we had to go through. I didn't say we read them all, but so things are really improving. On the other hand, publishing right now is in a crisis mode. We're losing editors. There's a lot of consolidation going on. So I think we need to find ways to support local creators, content creators. Catherine was talking about writers of, Indigenous writers, but how can we? I have all this stuff kind of bubbling up. I know, like Los Angeles Public Library just bought their own publishing house. So they bought a house that's already a publisher. I think we need to think outside of the famous box and look at ways how can we work with the people in our community? In Tulsa, we have our fellows, and they're creating, artists, and how can we help get their content to our customers? I don't know if that was helpful. I was kind of rambled all over the place. I'm sorry, but I think the main point is, as you're doing your work, have in front of mind, I need to include something different, a diverse point of view, get people in a display, make sure you've got a diversity of voices. As you're doing face outs, in your collection, go through your shelf and see what's the one that's different, what's the one that's a person of color, an author clone. Face that one out, and make sure your staff is used to doing this, starts getting used to doing this. So I hope that's helpful.
That was awesome. Thank you so much. I think it was a very thoughtful ramble, and thank you so much. And exciting to hear that Los Angeles is doing something exciting to connect with their authors. Does anyone else kind of want to speak to that, and how you can branch out to a broader audience, maybe who beyond representation, and maybe like people to kiddos who should learn about the different identities and cultures and everything. How do you reach those? Does anyone want to speak to that at all? If not, I have other questions.
One thing I would mention is to diversify your own media consumption. So if you're a podcast listener, I listen to tons of podcasts, and make a conscious effort to seek out voices different from your own. And it may be that, that ends up not being for you, or it ends up not working out for you. But in my experience, I've gotten a lot of interesting new perspectives by being very conscious about diversifying what I listen to and what I consume.
I just want to add that that's an excellent answer. I think a lot of times when we are in our own diverse communities, it can be easy to want to say, oh, I just want to read books by Black authors because I didn't see those very often growing up. And so even as people of color, we can get kind of sucked into our own, oh, I want to read books by people from my community. But it is important to make sure that we are reading books by other POC and other people in other communities. So that was great, Carl. Thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, what a great way to start from the personal, and you can share that with our customers and our community. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I also wanted to add to Larissa's point. I think one of the really cool thing about the centers at the library is that we get to do programming in connection to collection management. So for example, like right now we're doing a like trip around the world kind of series where we're talking about different countries. Kind of went into it not knowing how it was going to go, but it's helped me realize that we have more Venezuelan folks that are using our services and that are coming into our programs. And so, in conjunction with programming, I think that's also a really good way to see like who's coming into the library, who is browsing your books, because I myself am Mexican, so sometimes I see things through that perspective and that lens. But that also helps me expand like, okay, well, what is this community interested in reading, or what is something that they might need, or even going into like history and like nonfiction, um, making sure to have like the right materials and that your collection represents your community.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Oh, go ahead, Kim. Sorry.
I was also going to just say that if you can also take the library out into the community and connect, then that's also great. I'm exclusively work with children. Well, not exclusively, but primarily work with children. And we all work with our school librarians. And recently, like we just did book talks with one of my school librarians, and she's going to make up a survey for her kids to see what they want us to do book talks on, so that we can get a better idea of what they want just for her school K through 5th. So just getting out into the community too, and then letting them know that, hey, you also have librarians at your public library when school is out. And you can come see us, and then they already know you too. So
Could
I
I,
think oh,
I'm
go
sorry,
ahead.
Catherine.
No, you're good. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I agree with what Kim was just saying and how important it is to get out of our bubble. Like and everybody is saying is just, if only see what's coming into our space, then we've got blinders on. We have to be out in the community as much as we can and see who's out there. As Catherine said earlier, the indigenous community, they're not monolithic. The Latino community is not monolithic. It goes for everyone, African American, Afro Latino, Afro-Indigenous, and then so we have to get away from just keeping our pre-existing ideas. I don't know. Thanks, Catherine. Go ahead.
Well, Kim, I love that you brought up connecting with schools, because I also think about connecting with Indian education programs in schools, because that could be a beneficial place to like have things like those book talks, but also that could be a great resource for finding indigenous literature and materials for K through 12. And I think that's a connection that has been vastly underutilized. So I think that would be a great place to kind of like reach out into the community there, because I mean, especially for urban natives, um, it's really easy to feel like disconnected from your tribe when you're not on tribal lands. So having that Indian education program is kind of your cultural connection. And if you can get the library to kind of like help work with that, then it creates a much stronger safety net.
Thank you guys. That was awesome. All right. My next question is for Carl. how do you balance the need for visibility with the potential challenges or controversies that may arise from queering library displays?
So my first answer is to kind of go back to my previous response, which is, if you have a Pride Month display, then that's going to be a target. That's just the way it is. People are going to come in and say, why are you doing this? We shouldn't be doing this. Depending on your community, that can be negative responses at varying levels, right? But if you are, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't create a pride display, okay? But if you are creating displays that are more generalized in topic, that have other ways of drawing interest, and then including queer materials in those, including queer characters, in ways that are, I don't want to say flying under the radar necessarily, but that's going to be a much safer way, I think, to handle that kind of situation. Sorry, I dropped something on the floor. Other than that, be prepared with policy. Always know what your library policies are. Policies need to anticipate problems, not respond to them. So make sure that you're working with your administration, working with your leadership to make sure that your policies reflect the expectation of pushback, and make sure that they cover them as much as possible.
Thank you, Carl. I like the leaning on your policy, not leaning on it, but having that as a tool is really good. But also, like you said, the city of display sounds like a good one to incorporate those queer content and that queer books. All right. We got about 8 more minutes, so I'm going to ask a couple more questions, and then at 12:50 we will take a break for 10 minutes. Just to give you guys a breather. All right, Kim, I've got a question for you. In what ways can librarians address cultural sensitivity and avoid stereotypes when curating book displays? And after Kim responds to this, everyone kind of feel free to include, because I think you all have great thoughts and ideas and can kind of bounce off each other really well.
Well, I think I may have already kind of answered this. I don't have any other ideas than what I said earlier, in that because I only have my own perspective, I mind Novelist a lot, but there are lots and lots of other resources. That's just my favorite. And I often find that those other people will find things that I didn't even think about. And then I lean heavily on my coworkers and friends. I have specifically for Native American books, and by that have Native American characters in them, I usually defer to one of my coworkers who is Native American, because I know that she's going to know better than I am. So if there's a perspective that I find in question, and again, when I'm reading books, if I find something, I mean, we can all usually, when you're reading a book, say, is that might not feel right, and then you can take that and you can trust your own instincts on that. But then if you feel like you need backup on that, you can certainly ask your friends, neighbors, and coworkers about their perspectives, because again, I can only bring my own. So that's what I lean heavily on, our reviews and friends, family, and coworkers.
Does anybody else have kind of another thought? I know you guys really all did kind of share that way of doing it. Does anyone want to go more detailed, or we could move on to the next question? Jay, thank you for the question. We will keep those, and for anyone that's just joined us, we'll keep questions till the end. And I've got your question. It's awesome, and we will ask it at the end. Thank you, guys. Okay, let me ask Larissa a question before we start to head to break. How can libraries engage with and support local communities through programs and resources that celebrate African American heritage?
I really like this question. So I kind of keep two things in mind when I'm program planning. One, is this something that the community actually wants? And two, how can I partner with a community member to make it happen? And so I like to think of the African American Resource Center as just a place that it provides space. It provides the space for people to celebrate, and it provides the resources. So, as an example, I have recently worked with community members to do different things around the community. One was like showcasing a documentary about Black Wall Street. One was putting on a DJ workshop by Afro Latina, which was really fun. One was I had a community member who had this really incredible presentation about the Green Book, which was a book created that was used in the 40s, 50s, 60s to help African Americans move through the United States when they traveled, so they knew the safe roads and accommodations. And so these were all community led and all things that the people told me that they wanted, right? So I am from Georgia. I have only been in Tulsa about 6 years now. And just like everybody else was saying, in the same way that Latin people are not monoliths, in the same way that Indigenous folks are not monoliths, that is true for Black people as well. While we share culture, African Americans' experiences are very regional, right? My experience as a Black woman growing up in the South is different from an African American man from Montana. I don't know. You know what I mean? So you have to make sure that when you're thinking about the various experiences, um, you don't want to assume the wants. I don't want to assume that just because I'm African American, I know what everybody in Tulsa wants to do or see or what resources they need, because my experiences growing up are different from theirs. So you always want to, I try very hard to make sure that I am community member focused. I'm reaching out. I have so many coffee meetings just trying to get to know the people who are in my community and the things that they want to see. So I just try to make sure that it's very much community focused, as opposed to here's an event that I think you all should be excited to have. Come join it. It's instead of that, it's a, hey, I've heard that this is something y'all are interested in. What would that look like? And let's do it.
So real quick, right before we go to break, I just want to I want to ask a quick question off of that. So you talked, a lot of people have also talked about the community and finding what the community wants. Like Amarani talked about that. What are some of the ways that you've done that intentionally? Like you've reached out. Can you just speak to quickly about that, and we can discuss more later if needed?
I just randomly email people. I
Wonderful.
I do. I just like see what organizations are doing things. And I say, hey, my name is Larissa. I work for the library. I do this. Can we just chat so I can see more about what you do and what your constituents have to talk to you about? And that's why I said I have a lot of coffee meetings. It's just literally just like reaching out to people and saying, hey, I'll buy you a coffee if you can tell me what you're seeing. And even like having people from different sectors, right? Like we have an advisory committees, and that's also helpful. In my advisory committee, I have people who are in the finance sector, who's in education, who's in business. So they have their fingers on the pulses of what those needs are in our community. And that's very helpful in kind of seeing things that me and my little library bubble may not always recognize.
Even us as well, especially us as librarians, we have our own bubbles, and we need to get out in the community, like you and Kim and Amarani said. Thank you guys so much for our first half of the questions. Is it okay if we go ahead and take a quick 10-minute break? Thank you all again, and we'll see you at 1 o'clock. All right. We're just gonna wait for Amarani. And then we'll get back started. I just wanted to say that I forgot something. If you guys will evaluate this lunch and learn, and it'll be at the end. And then Katie will be sharing the sorry, I'm getting a ton of emails as I try to talk. That Katie will be sharing the recording and links in the chat via email. So anything that Catherine and Carl sent, or anybody that sends in the chat, that will be sent to you as well as the recording in the email, in an email. So don't stress if you have not clicked on that link.
Cheyenne, I'd like to add to what Larissa said earlier before we left
Yeah,
on break.
sure thing, please. Sorry I
Is
didn't
it-
give you much time to do so.
Oh, that's okay. Is now a good time? I see Amairani's
Yeah.
in the
Please do.
here. Okay, gracias. So we were talking a little bit about advisory committees and representation, and I thought it's important to kick it up a notch too, and look at your governing bodies at your libraries. How is the diversity of your administration, and that's really probably, above our pay grades, a lot of us, but I think it's worth mentioning that, is your commission, who's on your commission, is it really reflective of the community that the library is serving? So I just want to add those notes.
Larissa, did you have something to add as well, or were you saying thank you?
That was a thank you.
Okay, that's what I thought. I interpret it as that, and I just wanted to double check. All right, well, everyone is back. Thank you all for being patient and joining us again after the break. I have one more question on my specific person on the panel. I was going to ask Sarah or actually, I'm going to kind of ask a general, and then we'll ask Sarah the specific, or I'll ask the specific first, and then we'll start general. So, Sarah, as a member of the We Need Diverse Books Walter Award Selection Committee, what criteria do you use to identify and recognize diverse literature?
Okay. So this is the judging committee, and there's 9 of us on the committee from all over the country and different, diverse people. Basically, they just send out the invite to publishers, and then the publishers will send us their books and say, a lot of times they'll say, we're looking at author diversity and protagonist, the diversity of the characters. And then as we do our judging, we're looking at, quality, excellence of writing, and then whatever the topic is, how well is it addressed, authenticity, appropriateness, is just because it has an African American protagonist, how well is that depicted? Is it real? Is it something people, in this case, kids can relate to, can understand, can identify with? So, and then the publishers will often, say, this is why we think this book is deserving of a Walter Award. And then it's up to us to agree with that or not. A lot of times they send us books out the wazoo, and a lot of them are like, really, why are you sending me this book? It's obviously just something with a, anyway, I won't go there. But so that's kind of how the process has worked this year. That makes sense.
So we kind of asked, about the cultural sensitivity and avoiding stereotypes. Can each of you talk a little bit about how you would suggest and like to see the communities that you represent, or the part that we're talking about, uplifted and elevated in literature, libraries specifically, obviously, and and how we can all, as the library community, do that better. Whoever's ready to start.
I think one of the important things is to avoid problem and plight narratives. So some of you may remember I used to do a podcast with Adrian Butler from ODL, and we reviewed children and young adult books a lot. And I distinctly remember her just bemoaning the difficulty of finding books with Black main characters that were not about enslavement or Jim Crow. She just wanted to read books about Black people, Black girls living their lives and just being. And I think that that's something that publishers are definitely getting better about. But I think it's particularly when you're looking at historical fiction, it's still too easy to lean on the idea that, and I know I've heard this when talking with Native American folks as well, the idea that Native Americans are people of the past, they don't exist any longer, they don't have a life beyond the Old West. And so trying to see diverse experiences within those communities, I think, is really important.
Oh, Carl, that's so true. To that note, I just one of the books we were discussing last night is called Grounded. It's a young reader, kind of a J fiction. And it's based on Muslim kids, and it's a whole diversity of experience and different types of Muslim. Again, this is another group where they're not monolithic. There's all types of Muslims and all kinds of practices. And so there's 4 kids, very different, 4 stories, and they're having an adventure in an airport of all places. And it's just uplifting and fun and a really positive depiction of that group of kids.
That's so exciting. Kim, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I was just going to echo that and just say 100% yes, I agree with that. I noticed that in the books that I read, I have a dearth of history books because all the history books are just about slavery, or try and find a Vietnamese character that's not just about the Vietnam War. I mean, they do exist. There's one fantasy out there, a couple of fantasies out now, because again, I think the publishers are cluing in now. But 5 years ago, even, you couldn't find a book that was not about the Vietnam War or just the plight. And I think books like Black Boy Joy, that's an answer to that. Just books about kids being happy and living their lives. And 20 years ago, it was all centered around being LGBTQI, and now it's just that's part of who you are, but it's not the main focus of the story. And I love that those books are being published, and yeah, I think that shifting your focus away from those books that are trauma based, I just want to say I very much agree with that. So thank you.
And I'll also add, whatever your favorite genre is, actively seek out books by different communities in that genre. I will name that I am a romance reader. I like romance books. And so I try to read romance books by people of all, from different communities. I've read one with an autistic main lead. I read a lot of Asian American rom-coms because they're out there. So just like whatever your favorite genre is, actively try to find books by different people in that genre, because I think that can also give you insight into those experiences as well, and they're not solely focused on whatever trauma that group of people may have had in the past or in present day. So
Go ahead, Catherine.
Yes. So my thought was to focus on like staff within the library. Because I think it would be incredible to have more Indigenous librarians, but I understand that's not an easy fix. But there are things that librarians from other communities can do. You can like follow Native news. There are different Native news resources. You can follow those and get an idea of what Native people are thinking about and what they're talking about, what their kind of experiences are, things that are happening in those communities. I think that's really important. And, you know, whenever you can, try to find Indigenous content creators on social media. Just see kind of what's out there artistic and socially. And I think that's really beneficial for, you know, as Carl was pointing out, there are a lot of people that don't remember that Native Americans are still here. So having that kind of constant influx of current information about Indigenous communities is going to be really beneficial for staff to kind of conceptualize that they're still here. So that would be my recommendation.
Yeah, that's a really good, you guys got some really good insight into that. And I think that talks a lot about what Carl was talking about with starting at personal level and extending from podcast on. So going into that, I'd like to see what everyone else has to say. But what are some other practical steps that you would suggest for libraries and even I want to say schools, you know, library schools can take to educate their staff and create a more culturally competent and inclusive environment. And you guys have talked a lot about it, but if you have any other thoughts, let me know. Let's talk about it.
I can start, I guess. One thing I do at my branch is we make sure to have I think anyway a display every month featuring some kind of diversity. And we share that in the staff. So the team each gets a chance to create a display, and it should always feature some kind of diversity. We've done things like Afrofuturism, self-care for different communities. You know, this just off the top of my head, but I think it's so important to include the whole team, the whole staff, the people that don't usually do displays or collection things, get the opportunity to develop those skills too, and being mindful of the diversity piece.
Sarah, oh, what somebody talking?
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, Sarah, I think it's important that you mention people who are not just involved in the collection development, because the library is everybody who works there. It's the security guard, if your library has one, that you see as soon as you walk in. It's the people at your ask desks. It's the shelver. And I think it's very important for everybody who works in that building to understand who the community members are, to understand the history of that community, and know the type of people that come in. And I think that that starts from the top down. Like, everybody in the building needs to know the community. And so I think it's very important that when people are being hired, they get that, whatever that looks like, whatever that training looks like, they get that training on the community that they're going to be serving.
I was just going to say that in our branch that we've started doing that as well, what Sarah was talking about, in that every month there's an EDI committee who involves the entire library, and so they're experience centers, and they have other themes as well, but it helps to showcase the diversity in the community, and not just on the months that everybody celebrates it. That's kind of where I learned, oh yeah, it's better to not necessarily do it on those months, because that's when everybody does it, and that's we want to celebrate people all year round.
To Larissa's point, I just think about how when I was working in a public library as a circulation clerk, I was a librarian, because like, especially for kids, they don't understand that not everybody that works in the library is a librarian. So that's why, yes, that's an incredible point, that everyone in the location needs to know the community because you are all representing the library at all of those different levels. So that was a great point.
And don't forget to use your patrons as a resource. When I was at TCCL, when we did the summer reading program for teens, those cards included a space for an email address. And I kept lists of those and I used those to try to establish a teen advisory board. But you could also use those to do things like, hey, here's an email, send me some send me some book recommendations. What are you reading right now? What are you hearing about? What do you like? So make sure that you're using your patrons as well.
Can I jump in?
Please.
I was gonna say, kind of going off on the advisory board, if you have an opportunity to maybe put together a committee or a board of whether that be staff, ours has staff and community members, so we're able to have both people that are, knowledgeable on books, but also knowledgeable about the community. And when you put those two people together in one room, they really come up with lots of great ideas for your collection, and they bring in that new perspective. And then lastly, one thing on the kind of the trauma oppression theme with a lot of our books, we, because we're a part of the community, we have to experience that on the daily. So it's overwhelming to constantly have to read those kinds of narratives, and they're great. They're good. It's good to have that. But uh uplifting how important it is to have books that are, have people like me in any kind of story. Not necessarily being the subject, but being able to just be like everybody else. And that's what books are supposed to do, is take us out of our own world. So uplifting that.
Yeah, that's wonderful, guys. Thank you for sharing all of those. And we still have more questions, but I just wanted to thank you because you all are awesome. So going into a little more about programming, I know that we've talked about it and how we can extend that and how we can connect with our community, but I wanted to see if you guys had any successful examples of your libraries or your previous libraries that have implemented that diverse programming that goes beyond like Pride Month and Native American Heritage Month and things like that. So anyone had to share?
I can share. So one of the things that I've found that's easiest for me is that we have these cultural celebration month, but these months are also for various things. So one example is like July is Family History Month. And last year, yes, I don't know what year it is. Last year, I teamed up with our genealogy resource center to put on a program for Family History Month, focusing on African American genealogy. And so nobody thinks about Black people in July, and so that was a great way, right, to bring in something relevant for my community. So even thinking about things like that. So I've done that. I did a program called Blues U, which was a listening station, and we focused on um, blues music and the importance for African American culture. And that ran from December through February. And so honestly, I'm an African American person all year round. I want to go to events all year long. So just do them. Like, it's whatever program you want to do. It doesn't have to, like we were saying, it doesn't have to be in that month. You can make it for whatever month, because those people exist outside of those months. So they'll still go to those programs outside of that month. So I have done successful programs because that's my job, right? To put on programs all year long. So
What a cool experience center. That's awesome.
So I had an example. This is not necessarily a library program, but it absolutely could have some library tie-ins. I recently went to a winter solstice event at the First Americans Museum, and what I thought was particularly neat about it is my stepson is in high school and he's in the astronomy club. They actually invited their students to go to the winter solstice event. So it became an event that was not just about Indigenous celebration of those cycles of life. It was also about, the science of it. So I feel like there are things like that. And of course, if you're going for like solstice and equinox, there are four of those in a year. So you have plenty of opportunities to do it. But any sort of education that you can do on, uh, you could do like astronomy or like geography, you can do any sort of like weather cycles. There are lots of opportunities in there. And I just thought that was a really cool program. And I love that they were like including schools in it. So it became not just like, oh, it's that Indigenous event kind of thing. So it was for everyone to enjoy.
Anybody else have any thoughts or programs to share?
So now that I'm in maker spaces rather than working with patrons more directly in general library work, one of the programs that I really wanted to try was to throw a pocket party. We have a sewing machine in the maker space, and so I put together a presentation on kind of the history of pockets and where they come from, and then talked about the pocket parity problem. As a person who wears clothing designed for men and clothing designed for women, clothing designed for women has deficient pockets. And then we talked about everybody got to sew a historical pocket, like that would be worn, outside the clothing or inside the clothing. And then they were also able to bring in clothing that so that we could talk about how to add pockets to clothing or augment your pockets. It wasn't as well attended as I would hoped, but it was a lot of fun. And so that's just to say that if you have maker spaces in your library, make sure you're including those in your programming as well, and considering diverse perspectives in the things you do in your maker spaces.
Exactly. I think that's the issue, Carl. I mean, because any program we do should be for everybody. So how we need to look at how we're promoting them and who we're marketing to. Because if you're doing genealogy, if you're doing mending, if you're doing solstice, it's not just for it's for the whole community. So for example, if we wanted to start a stitching kind of embroidery, which didn't get off the ground, but anyway, so we want to make sure that we invite we have a Spanish language piece in the promotion, or somebody, if we could have a bilingual person there to help, with language. I think that always is going to augment your offering, your program offerings at any level. I mean, it's obviously story times, you're going to do your bilingual story times, but your story time should include everybody. Yeah.
And I think that could extend to ASL as well, which I know a lot of libraries are doing that now. And yeah, also, Carl, do you want to come to my Maker Lab and do something?
We'll talk.
I think also with Sada, your example of the embroidery stuff, you could include like cultural motifs, different designs that are specific to different like tribal nations or different cultures. That would be a really cool way to like incorporate that diversity into something that, is embroidery. It could be for everybody.
Awesome. Anybody else have anything to add? You guys are giving all the great programs and ideas. Especially, we have a new makerspace, so I'm taking notes. All right, my next question. How can libraries overcome potential resistance or pushback when implementing diversity initiatives, and what strategies can they use to build support within their communities? You guys talked a lot about having, Larissa talked about having a community to lean on and to work with as you create programs. So if you guys want to speak a little bit on that.
Again, I can only speak from the children's point, working in the children's section point of view, but I just want to reiterate that getting out in your community, and when your community comes in, learning kids' names, learning people's names, and talking to people and learning their stories. Every conversation every time you recommend a book, every time you're helping people, that's an opportunity to learn a little bit and listen to your patrons. And when you do that, that's when you start that grassroots is where you start building your community, and that's where you start getting community support.
I would also add with, having community members support your programming. I would say with like our advisory board, having their support also helps us with like funding, especially when it's something that maybe hasn't been tried before. But if your community, specifically like the leaders in your community, can see the need for something that, the community is asking for, then they're really good ways to like co-sign your ideas. So definitely reach out to them, and that kind of also adds to your team as you're, maybe trying something new, or, pushing for some more diverse programs or books as well.
My answer is data. I think data will save your butt. Because I think if you start to incorporate elements or programs that are serving specific communities, if you have demographic data on their presence in your geographic community, then like if people are going to argue with you on an ideological level, you have that, you have the minutia, the data that supports it. So if nothing else, you can use it to say, well, a certain percent of our population are part of this community. So we as the community organization have to serve this community. And I think I really liked kind of what Kim was getting at with having those conversations. I think having those personal conversations are going to be really beneficial for not only just like heading off, but addressing any sort of discomfort or objection. And I think that's a good way to kind of like protect yourself by hearing their stories, because there is a root concern that they have. And if you can find a way to find out what that concern is, you can figure out a way to address it while still serving diverse communities.
I think that in an age of social media, everybody is so oppositional with one another and so polarized, that having those conversations, I've had parents specifically ask me my beliefs, and have found that after a long time of forming relationships with their families, them asking my beliefs and finding that I believe differently than them, and it throws people into a conflict with themselves, because now there's somebody standing in front of them that is kind to their kids and has helped their family, and that you've gotten to know, and you like them as your librarian, but they don't agree with what your politics or your beliefs. And so I think all of those conversations can be really beneficial on a large scale, not just when it comes to diversity and not getting pushback.
I love the mainstay of listening and and discussing. That's really great. I think that's kind of been what you all have talked about so well.
And
Go
Roxanne
ahead, Carl.
mentioned in the chat, you know, we can't ignore the fact that there is leadership at the state level that is actively suppressing diverse opinions, diverse voices, diverse perspectives, and that is going to have a chilling effect. You know, it's going to embolden people who want to censor. It's going to make it more difficult to do the things that we all know we need to do, and it's not fun. But yeah, data and policies and support from your administrations is going to be the key to everything. And I know that some places do not have those things, and that's very hard.
Does anybody else want to touch on what we've discussed of this question?
I was just going to add and emphasize that, and all the programs are for the whole community. So if we're offering programs for the whole community and finding ways to include members of that community that are diverse, that's I find that really hard to argue with at any level. So thanks, Catherine. That's excellent. And Carl.
All right. I have pretty much got all the questions. They've all you guys have all answered them like before I even got to ask. And so I think that's awesome that you guys just said all the things. Is there anything that you all would like to share about your experience and the time? You guys have a lot of time and experience under your belt, your library belt. And so I just wanted to see if there was anything you guys wanted to share before we started questions. In about 5 minutes, we can start questions from the chat.
I just want to say I appreciate all you guys because libraries are a safe space, and especially again for kids, sometimes that's the only safe space that people are going to have, kids or adults. And I think that's kind of what keeps me going, even in the face of laws coming down and suppression, that what we're doing is really, really important. And if you can be a safe space for just even one person, and you know it's a lot more than that, that you're doing good work. So thanks to all of you.
Yeah, I'm going to emphasize, even though I'm a moderator, I'm going to say you guys are awesome.
I just wanted to share real quick something that I created as the Tribal Libraries Committee chair is a resource list. It's called the Tribal Libraries Resource List, but it actually has information that's beneficial for anyone serving Indigenous communities, which is everyone in the state of Oklahoma. So I'm going to drop that in the chat real quick. So you can bookmark that. And that has all sorts of resources. I know I mentioned earlier, sorry. I know I mentioned earlier following Native news resources. I have a list of those. There's like teaching and educational resources, for example, on teaching with cultural sensitivity around Thanksgiving when you have Indigenous populations. Lots of really interesting stuff. So please check it out. And I think the thought that my last thought that I want to share is it's a little saying, I can't take credit for it, but whenever you're considering how to present or represent communities, you should have nothing about us without us. So if you're wanting to represent Indigenous communities, there should be Indigenous stakeholders and contributors as a part of that effort. And I think that's true for all of the other communities here. There should be nothing about these communities without those communities being a part of it.
All right. Does anybody have anything to add before we get to questions?
Catherine, you're so awesome. Dang. Wow. I was just gonna remind, I don't know if we've mentioned BiblioCommons. If you use BiblioCommons, I think there's lots of cool lists on there with book titles and resources like that. I know if you look up Latine, Latinx, Latino, Hispanic, you'll probably find some really good lists that we've put together. No, am I, Donnie? I think.
Awesome. I think they had a comment, a raised hand.
Oh, yeah, this is Ellen. I'd just like to say thank you to everybody for the ideas. I'm looking forward to listening to this again because I'm just going, oh my gosh, there's a whole new world out here. And yeah, and people who put together resource lists and keep them up are, polish your halo, Catherine.
Yay for resources list.
Yes.
All right, so we have two questions that were in the chat. The first one's from Jay Edwards. And then I will ask the one that Roxanne just sent after Paula's. So Jay Edwards says, it sounds like a good idea to make sure diverse authors are represented in neutral topics, such as making sure women, queer authors, and authors of color in a STEM display. But how do you go about finding out how authors identify? Some authors may not enumerate their background, especially if they aren't writing about their backgrounds. No rush.
I can jump in, and I've found that if the author has any social media, sometimes they really kind of add in some personal notes in there. But there are also some authors that prefer to, not really disclose so much about their identity. They might write about it. So even maybe just picking up some of their work to see what themes are in there, or maybe like in the afterword or in the introduction if you're really trying to find. But that's also I think it also opens up dialogue on identity, and some are more open than others, and ensuring that. And I think that's another experience too.
Awesome. Does anybody else have a response to Jay's question?
Yes. So when I'm looking up authors to include on like my resource list, I will typically do a search for like Indigenous authors to watch, or, must reads right now. And that'll give me a start. Like, I don't want to end there. Because once I have like that list of authors, I also have maybe their previous works. And then if I have that information, you can use different like collection development tools to find like read-alikes. So you might find ones that are similar, also from Indigenous authors that haven't made it onto this list. So I think like it's a multi-step process, but I think it's definitely worth investing the time into, because once you start that list, you start to get a better idea of kind of the landscape of the literature, and you also get an idea of authors that are working in not as frequented genres. So for example, Commander Harrington wrote a children's book because he's an astronaut. So it's a children's book about what an Indigenous author. So
I think we
that show up.
missed a part of yours. You're cutting out a little bit.
Oh no. What was the last thing you heard?
About the astronaut.
Okay. So I was just going to say that, you can find things that you wouldn't typically find otherwise, you can always look up tribal author lists. So some tribal nations will have a list of authors that are fairly prominent. So that's another way to look.
A number of the nations also have their own presses, the Chickasaws being one of them. Very well established, and I think the Cherokees do to some extent. And kind of look, because I've seen even Cheyenne Arapaho or Arapaho publications done by their people before.
I just want to say that on Novelist, a lot of times they will just use the words own voices, which is a great way to identify if the author of the book is an own voices book, and that will just tell you that.
All right. Does anybody else have a response for this question? I can move on to the next one. All right. Paula Long asks, policies were mentioned earlier. If anyone has a robust display policy or even a procedure that speaks to both how topics for displays and books for displays are chosen, would you be willing to share? I'd love to see how other libraries are addressing this in practice. It's a great question. Nobody have any thoughts? Okay.
I know that TCCL has a display policy, but I don't know it because I do not typically do displays. But I can find it and get it out.
Yeah, I'm
'Cause we
looking
do
for
have
it on the website.
Okay.
I'm not finding it either,
Like I
right?
know we have
Easily.
one.
Yeah.
But I don't know but it does speak to making like the diversity of various groups and all of that kind of stuff. So we will find it.
Thank you, Larissa. This is Stacy at Paula's Library too. And what we're finding is we have this really, really great collection development policy with the matrix for how we choose books. We haven't found anyone who's who's documenting their matrix for displays. So if we have a challenge book, it is so easy for me to be able to defend why we have it. If we were to ever to be challenged on a display, right now, as it is, it's just, well, we felt like it, right? Which is not very defensible. So we're just hoping that someone's gotten something amazing in paper, similar to all the amazing collection development policies.
Kim, I might be wrong, but is there something specific for Pioneer on our in our GovDocs? I can't think. I feel like I've ran across something.
I don't know.
Okay.
Sorry.
Sorry, I was thinking about Pioneer and I feel like I have run across something, but it could have just been our collection development.
I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that.
Well, that's a great question. And if you, TCCL, if you want to share that, if you find it and you can share it, Katie, can they send it out? Okay. So Katie, send it to Katie and she can send that. And yeah. Okay. So the next question is from Helen C. I was ahead of this session. I can understand how someone can get more than a little fed up with a once a year lip service. I'm looking forward to hearing your comments about this. In particular, what steps do you recommend to promote greater awareness of your group's history and actions?
So I mentioned this earlier and I have found that it works for me. So I mentioned that outside of the racial, cultural representations of the months, usually each month has a different social sort of focus. And I have found that using those is very helpful for me. So what's an example that I can, like I said, July is Family History Month. So I will create bibliocommons guides that focus on books that speak to African American and Black families, whatever that looks like. It can be nonfiction, it can be fiction. I have done, I'm trying to think specifically, or even the intersectionalities, right? For Hispanic Heritage Month, I have done guides for Afro-Latin representation. So things like that. So trying to take whatever other thing that you're interested in and also bringing those diverse voices into it, I think is the way to think about it. Because like I said, people from all over are in every sector. And so it's just a matter of finding them and making sure that we bring that to the forefront. So that has really been helpful for me, kind of using those social pieces to highlight people from my own community.
One of my favorite resources is Chase's Calendar of Events, which is a publication that just goes day by day through the year and says, you know, this is a particular observation for this year or for this day. And you can make a display about anything. I mean, you know, I did a display in when I was at NSU. I can't tell you what month it was or when it was, but during that month was National Pig Day. And we just did a display that had books about pigs, books about pork processing, books about that had pig in the title, you know. And just doing something goofy and fun like that is a great way to kind of think outside your box and think, well, how else can I make things fit into this little fun thing?
Anybody else want to answer?
And I did want to also add, so the reason my focus, obviously I'm the African American Resource Center coordinator, so my focus is always on African Americans. But if you don't want to make your programming so focused and specific, because like Sarah said, programs are for everyone, just always making sure that other titles are visible. So like Carl said, whatever your pig displays, if there's a pig book by an author that's not white, or able-bodied, you know, include that, right? So you don't have to name, hey, look, I have this display about African Americans. Look at what I'm doing. You can just make sure that they're visible in that display and in whatever else you're doing.
Throw in a kosher cookbook.
I mean, also
Exactly.
in your promotional materials, if you're using photos or people, make sure that you have a diverse palette in that.
Awesome. Thank you guys for answering Paula's question, or Helen's question, sorry. Then I have another question from Stacy in Stillwater. Has anyone found a good resource for finding queer demographics in a particular community? I believe there may be census data targeted to specific tribes represented in a community, but perhaps Catherine has a better suggestion for us.
I do. So one suggestion that I would make is to actually contact your local public schools Indian Education Department. They may not be able to give you the specific data, but they can give you an outline of like the top few tribes that are represented by their school district. And for some of us, we have like several different school systems in an area. Like, so for the OKC metro area, there's Edmond, there's Yukon, there's OKC, there's Norman, there's more. So like you have a lot of different places to check, and then you can just kind of like cross-reference. That would be my recommendation besides just finding general census data. That's also really helpful because many students don't just identify with one tribe. And when you have census data, they typically won't include the tribal identity. So getting the information about the students as much as you can will be really helpful to get you kind of like a picture of the families that are in your community.
And did anybody have a suggestion for the queer demographics, or maybe how to find that within an area?
I unfortunately don't. I was just doing a little search on my own, and it looks like the Williams Institute at UCLA School of Law does some surveys there, but it doesn't look like it gets much more specific than statewide. But I'll definitely share that link. And yeah, it's definitely, you know, in order to have data, you have to have somebody who collects the data. And if there's nobody doing it, then we don't know. But I'll go ahead and share this as well.
Thank you, Carl.
Might reach out if there's like an organization in your community, or maybe like, you know, a center that works specifically with queer folks, that they could, you know, reach out to them. And, you know, maybe you could even collaborate on a way to you know, survey folks that are coming in. So yeah.
Maybe
Yeah,
the university.
yeah. Campuses, for example, may have different LGBTQ, etc. Organizations. I know Oklahoma State does, and those, you know, they're that for people, for the students, and also for families of people who are students who happen to be LGBT, etc.
Thank you. All right, those were the final questions. Did anybody have any questions that they wanted to ask really quick to our panelists? We have about like 8 minutes until we're officially done. So, I mean, it's up to you guys. You guys asked some really great questions. All right. Well, thank you.
I
Oh,
have a good
sorry.
one since we have some time. Have you already talked about what you're reading now? What was your favorite book of 2023 or
That's
anything
such
like
a good
that?
question.
Well,
Oh,
I'll
no.
start.
Go ahead.
So I was my reading was a casualty of COVID. I had a real crash in my ability to read for pleasure when COVID hit. And the book that got me back on back onto reading this last year was Gabriel the Ninth, the first book in the Locked Tomb series, which is lesbian necromancers in space. That's kind of your short description. Gideon the Ninth. Thank you, Jay. There are 3 books in the series so far. There's a 4th one coming out, and all I could think of was the 2nd and 3rd titles. Thank you, Jay. Gideon the Ninth. Really, really great book. I had a wonderful time with it. The other books in the series are very different in tone, and I didn't really care for them as much. But that first book is just a joy. I had a great time with it.
It's been on my list.
I'm currently reading Our Missing Hearts by Celeste Ng, and so far absolutely love it. I don't usually read adult books, but I mean, I have a 2-person book club with my husband, and so we're reading that book together. And I also just finished The Other Woods, which has a non-binary main character, and it's sort of fantasy horror. Kids, I sort of a tween book, and I really enjoyed it. It was really, really good. And as Roxanne mentioned earlier, she recommended Sal and Gabby Break the Universe, I didn't read that this year, but it is kind of my favorite book of all times. I listen to it when I go to bed. It's just so good. It's a great window into Cuban community in Florida, and you will love every character in it. And that's also a kid's book. And Everything Sad is Untrue. Got to give it a shout out because it's an amazing book.
I've been listening to the audiobook in the Small Medium series, and it's titled Big Trouble. It's a lit RPG, so if you're a fan of Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder, the world building system that they have for it is incredible. It gets you the feeling of being in a role-playing game without having the stress of making the decisions yourself. So I've been really enjoying it, and that's what I listen to when I'm driving.
I am reading a classic right now, Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. I always end up every single year. I can't get through the year's list, so I'm making up for the other year's list. But also I'm looking forward to reading Blackouts by Justin Torres. Also touches a lot on LGBTQ plus community in there. So yeah.
I'm gonna shameless plug. So I've been reading a lot of books recently by Terry McMillan because she will be in Tulsa on February 9th at 6:30 p.m. to receive the Sankofa Freedom Award. So if you are in Tulsa on February 9th at 6:30 p.m. at Rudiso Regional Library, she will be here live and in person. So I've been really reading her books. And I was a toddler when the more popular of her books came out. So it's been really interesting to like go back and read what was important for Black middle class women in the 80s and 90s. It's been really fascinating. So I'm really, really excited to meet her. So I have been pretty much just going through her catalog, and she's great. So.
And Sarah?
So many books, so little time. Well, I just loved Mexican. I think I put it here in the chat, but I had so much fun reading that book, and it's for anybody, and it's just a celebration of Mexican families and youth and exuberance and a kind of a picture of what could be, what should be. You know, it's nonfiction, but it's like a time when it wasn't such, crossing the border wasn't as fraught as it is now. I mean, there was still that thing, but it's just a lot of fun. And my second plug would be for The Cemetery of Untold Stories, which is not out yet, but Julia Alvarez. She just knocks it out of the park every time, Julia Alvarez. So when that comes up, I think her last one was Afterlife, which was also excellent. And this is going to be another one that's a lot of fun. Thanks for asking.
I
Awesome.
also found the display guide.
Oh, good. I couldn't
I'm
find
gonna
it.
try to attach it. Is that a thing in this? Okay. I'm gonna try to do that. Although I can't figure out how. Okay, let's see.
If you haven't seen the chat really fast, Katie put the evaluation for this module in the chat. Make sure you fill it out when you have a chance, and it'll be sent in the email in the coming days. That will have the links and the recording of this. So thank you guys so much for discussing with us, and I am so excited. And yeah.
I'll just actually email the guy because I cannot figure out how to attach it to the chat. Oh, I am.
Roxanne put her email in the chat, so.
Okay,
Or no, Katie's email, sorry.
Okay, we'll do that.
All right.
Thank you, Cheyenne, for moderating.
Thank you.